but when you get it, it's a wonderful thing to use, and you can use it to help reclaim the narrative. And I'm aware that anything I'm saying is, again, from that external perspective. So my familiarity with contemporary literature from Africa was not as strong as I wanted to be. And Frankie didn't realize that when he invited me here, he was assigning me homework. But he also didn't realize how much I love homework. So I downloaded about 35 books by all of you to my phone, and have been reading them all at once, because I read very strangely. I read everything at once. And I'm hoping that by the end of the conference you will all sign my phone. And really, my only regret about the time I'm spending at this conference is that it's taking away from the time I could be reading the books by you that I have downloaded on my phone. So maybe I'll run away, read, and come back. But again, thank you all for being here. Thank you, Frankie, and the amazing staff of NYU Accra for arranging this event, and everybody who's co-sponsored it. I could not have...
I'll take the love. Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. I was wearing a proper jacket this morning, like Elliot just before us, but of course, the wonderful drumming, the wonderful dancing had us all dancing, so sorry for the informality. So I want to thank, of course, Chika, Frankie, Edosian. Dear Frankie, thank you for gathering us all in this beautiful way. I am a relentless reader, and so I am really delighted to be in the company of more than 30 literary lights from across the huge and diverse continent of Africa. My most prized inanimate possessions are the books that crowd my office, every room of my home, and every home I've ever lived in, my nightstand and my suitcase, to the utter despair of my family who carts these books around the world for me and with me. Dear pages, some crisp, some crinkly, some printer ink fresh, some musty, and their crumbling spines promise enchantment in other times and in elsewheres that I could never enter on my own. I am particularly thrilled to have with us for this conference Wole Soyinka. Wole Soyinka, who I am so proud and delighted to call my faculty colleague at NYU Abu Dhabi. It's a particularly meaningful appointment for us, or for me personally, because when I was a student in the US, an undergraduate student, I was assigned to read Wole's Ake, The Years of Childhood, which had been published a couple of years before, in 1981. I'm dating myself here a little bit, but it was fresh, and I had never heard of Wole Soyinka. And I am ashamed to say that, and I'm just as ashamed to say that Ake was the first work of literature from all of Africa that I read, even though I considered myself a reasonably well-read young person. And what a great book to enter the literature of Africa. Ake opened a world to me that was both utterly familiar and recognizably human in a more universal sense, a place I longed to know more of. I was astounded that this book was a memoir because it read like a novel. I loved its retrospective self-portrait of the author as a young boy. And I marveled how this boy inadvertently served as my eyes and ears and nose onto the rich natural world, the human connections, and the social tensions of the Yoruba village that was his world, is still Wole Soyinka's world. I couldn't believe how this village that I had never set foot in could be as rich and large and complex as my childhood Amsterdam, which was then still the center of my universe. How parochial I was, I realized. Books do this. Books transform us, they widen our mental purview and imagination, they challenge our inherited beliefs. They bring us together, as we see here, around shared thoughts and human conditions that are then reimagined by the words and the sheer narrative drive of one person, one artist, one author. And as I'm an art historian, I believe I can say that this capacity of literature to do these things animates all forms of art. Poetry, theater, film, music and visual and media arts and dance give us access as nothing else can to the thoughts and feelings of other human beings, our fellow travelers in this extremely challenged world and life we lead. Fellow humans who may be far away in time or place or disposition. They can be down the street but be very different from you. But these same authors also, these fellow humans we learn about through literature, also know our hopes, our losses, our aspirations, our loves. UNESCO has designated Accra the World Book Capital for 2023 to 2024. And I think this marvelous conference hosted by NYU Accra on reclaiming the narrative underscores why this vibrant city of West Africa, which I love, it's not my first time here, is such a great choice for this UNESCO distinction that's hard to achieve. All of the writers here with us make up a beautiful mosaic of the literary production of Africa in its full diversity. And I think to all of you writers here, your commitment to getting young people of this continent and well beyond reading and writing is offering them opportunities and pathways to develop critical thinking and a global sensibility in an age of deglobalization. I don't believe in deglobalization, but I think literature is one of our bulwarks against it. And that sensibility of being in and of the world defines New York University today. With 3 degree-granting campuses, one of course in New York, one in Abu Dhabi and one in Shanghai, and 12 research and teaching sites like NYU Accra across 6 continents. I think Antarctica is coming. We represent a great shift in higher education in this century that we need to hold on to and foster further. Today, I believe that the intellectual and creative endeavors of universities can only be both global and local. NYU Accra is a key site in NYU's global network that instantiates and promotes that thinking and action. And I'm thrilled that we're celebrating that 20th birthday. Happy birthday, NYU Accra. Our wonderful director, yes. Our wonderful director, Frankie, likes to say that Accra is at the center of the world, not just physically, but also developmentally. And you're proving it these days to us, and we're so happy to be a part of it. NYU Accra immerses its students from NYU, from many places in NYU, not only in rigorous study, we want them to learn, and they're here volunteering through the weekend, which is great, but it also immerses them in the culture, the politics, and the commerce of this wonderful city and country. To all of you writers here again, your works that will be showcased in this conference have truly unique impact, and we are so grateful for it. Literature from Africa, as I've come to know it a little bit over the years, excavates buried truth. It connects us to the inner and the communal lives of ancestors of many stripes, and to their resilience and magnificence. Literary forms from Africa are such innovative models for style and technique. Wole Soyinka, Chinua Achebe, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, Aminata Forna, and many others, many of them here, have long been challenging standardized Western forms of storytelling and also using them and bringing the changes upon them. And they thereby have inspired and continue to inspire writers and readers all over the world. So I really can't wait to listen and to learn from all of you over the next 3 days. And then I can't wait to get back to yet more of your books. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariette, for reminding us of the values of books. And I dare add that buy a book, read a book, and book a place in heaven. Our distinguished ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker It's three things in one. Senior Vice President, Global Inclusion and Strategic Innovation. With love in our hearts, let's welcome with one heart, Lisa Coleman.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. This is my, I think, 15th time in Accra, so I'm just so excited to be back. It's been a long time since I was here, but very excited to be back. I, of course, want to thank Frankie. Frankie, just amazing. Your entire team, of course, thank you for inviting us. Your leadership has already been talked about in realizing this conference. And of course, thank you to the acclaimed authors and faculty who have joined us today and of course, as Mariette mentioned, of course, this is the UNESCO World Book Capital. So we have over 30 countries represented. And I would like to thank also the leadership of NYU Global Programs and all of the speakers that have spoken before. So let me start by saying, first I want to acknowledge my deep appreciation for all the people who work behind the scenes. I do this a lot, but there are people here who made this conference possible who are not actually in the room. And so we'd also like to thank our ancestors who paved the way for us to be here. And that includes many of the writers who paved the way, who are no longer with us. So yes, a round of applause. I would also like to give a big shout out to all of the co-sponsors. As I was walking through, there's so many people who made this possible. So a big shout out, and I know Frankie was doing a lot of work to make this all possible. So as Elliot mentioned, he's not shy. So today I too want to follow up like Mariette and talk about the creatives, the writer, the readers. My best friends are the creatives. My literal best friend is a writer who lived in Ghana and Nigeria for over 18 years. I often talk, and some of the people here know that I've talked about my family and their jobs a lot because they provide in America. We like to talk about jobs a lot. But I also come from a family of artists. People who were also scientists and artists. And it was that that would allow me to understand the world. People who were creating things in a world to reimagine and reshape the possibilities of what we've been, what we are, and what we can be. I'm often reminded that the reason that writers, artists, poets, and creatives are often the most persecuted in times of war, and discrepancy, and disillusion, and that's because of what they can reimagine and bring to the page. It was books that made my life possible. People often talk about mentorship. Mine came from the authors that provided me a world beyond my own, jumping off the page, calling out to me to find more about the world. And of course the continent, which on our maps in the United States on our maps is bigger than Africa. Ridiculous. And I have to admit that it was the books that I found outside of the classroom that would bring me to these African diasporic worlds. Eventually I found the mentors and teachers who would support me, but that certainly was not the case initially. School for me was like a confining place for those who wanted to follow the rules, and I was never a rule follower. I was seeking out those who would break the page open, go beyond the imagination of Eurocentrism, and move in the spaces of African brilliance and continental reimaginations. So I think we are all in debt to you creators, to the writers, who make it possible for us to reimagine, to live and breathe the words that take us to vibrant, textured spaces, historical and contemporary, unimagined places that are vibrant, multi-layered, faceted, joyful, dark, sometimes pain-filled and also magical, beautiful, narrative arcs that allow us to traverse time and leverage the power of literature, poetry, music, and storytelling. As Mariette said, those who reclaim the narratives. One of the reasons that I work in higher education is because I'm extremely interested in the next generation. Sometimes they're not interested in me, but that's another story. The generation of what is possible, the generations of emerging artists, as we will see here today, who imagine a new future, whose archives and stories will change the way that we see the world. As Mariette mentioned, at NYU we are committed to meaningful partnerships. Our sites are built in reciprocity, and we know that that is a process that we have to continue to reimagine so that we are not the colonial other or the imperial other. Our work is integral. This work here will be integral to reclaiming narrative and decolonizing knowledge productions, and by decentering, North Atlantic and Western loci of academic production. Today, as I said, I'm thrilled to be here in all of the discussions that we will have. And so I will start the end of my remarks, and again thank Frankie and the Accra team for bringing us together to celebrate these authors. And thank you, all of you here who will share your work later. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm going to end with 2 quotes. One is by my favorite author, and many already know who that is for you in the audience, and it's James Baldwin. And James Baldwin is a very well-known author who's deceased. So this first quote is from him. And I am reminded that I had the opportunity to meet James Baldwin as a child because my family believed in that particular aspect of art and the power of writing. The quote is, quote, "The world is before you, and you need not take it as it was when you came in." End quote. Change the world. My second quote is from Miriam Abba. Of course, it is from So Long, a Letter. Quote, "Books saved you. Having become your refuge, they sustained you. The power of books, this marvelous invention of astute human intelligence, various signs associated with sound, different sounds that form the word, juxtaposition of words, which springs from the idea, thought, history, science, life, sole instrument of interrelationships and of culture, unparalleled means of giving and receiving. Books knit generations together in the same continuing effort that leads to progress. They enabled you to better yourself, and what society refuses you, they grant." Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yet another reminder, the values of books. So get a book. Everybody has to go away with a book today. And the authors are here, they will autograph them for you graciously. Next, we take a word from Representative of His Excellency Ambassador Charles Abani, UN Resident Coordinator. Do we have a representative? So I may have to do a transposition. Head of UNESCO Ghana office, I'd like to welcome you to Accra in a very special way. This is his first time. Let's welcome Mr. Edmond Bukala.
Yes, you won't believe it. It's the first time too. But I'm really delighted to be here. Coming from Bamako office, where I was heading a UNESCO program in Mali. And I'm so delighted to see many scholars, head of universities, professors, students, researchers, and probably also diplomats. So I'm really greeting you, sending you greetings from the Director General of UNESCO, who generously trusted me with the task to come and head the office of Accra. So I'm really honored to be here at the Labon Dialogue, and I bring greetings, as I mentioned. First of all, one of the things that I would like to commend really the Writers Project of Ghana, the NYU, Accra, and all local partners for crafting this innovative and important symposium. I'm confident that this symposium will inspire, equip writers, publishers, and other actors in the writing and creative spaces, supporting the continuation and growth of local knowledge production in Ghana. For your information, the creative economy is one of the fastest growing industries in the world. It accounts for almost 3.1 global GDP and 6.2% of employment, providing decent work, especially for women and youth. This includes the literary profession. The present symposium, set against the backdrop of Accra's designation as the UNESCO World Book Capital of 2023, stands as a statement to the city's unwavering commitment to fostering a culture of reading and promoting the book industry. This prestigious title also highlights the broader narratives of Ghana's dedication to knowledge and literacy. Despite the steady rise of illiteracy rates over the past 50 years, there are still 773 million illiterate adults around the world, most of whom are women. These numbers produced by the UNESCO Institute of Statistics are a reminder of the work ahead of us if we are to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, especially Target 4.6, to ensure that all youth, most adults, achieve literacy, numeracy by 2030. So today's event, being my first public appearance, I will kindly ask you to bear with me a little longer, especially since the resident coordinator didn't show up. So I'm taking his time, then I'm wheeling it on my own time. For a legitimate reason, I think you will probably agree with me or disagree. We always welcome that at university, whether you agree, but at least you let me speak my voice. So to allow me to properly share my thoughts on the theme of the Labon Dialogue, reclaiming the narrative. Today's theme is well-fitting. The UNESCO General History of Africa project, launched in 1964. The General History of Africa project has played a crucial role in transforming the social, educational, and cultural landscape of Africa, fostering an authentic African narrative. One of the core reasons we are joining you today is because we share the same objectives in regard to reaching out to marginalized groups living with high levels of illiteracy. One will wonder why community, particularly youth, are more and more illiterate. Why have they abandoned their interest in reading while remaining very active on social networks? Certainly, it is because you will understand, each of us, my predecessors who have spoken, they've really touched on the various causes and reasons, and also how important this event is. But coming from UNESCO, you will not doubt to expect it from me that I will be going to archaeological findings and facts to also try to reclaim the narratives, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. But I'll be conscious of time, don't worry. So, certainly it is because the lion has been introduced only to read the tale of the hunter. reason of existence. More and more historians have strived to approach the study of African with more rigor, objectivity, and and open-mindedness, uses certainly with the usual precaution African sources themselves. That's where I'm heading to, African sources. This shows the importance
I
of
still
the
don't get
9 volume
sound.
of the General History of Africa, which I really would like to invite you to read,
Okay, yeah, let me see.
add into your list.
I think it's
That would like to
surround
read, but
sound you
also
are
would
getting.
like to invite all our partners who are here present. I don't know
How
who
clear
are,
is
but
it?
I think
The sound you are
I'm
getting.
really just committing as a head of office that this will be really my priority to ensure that partnership is built so that not only the Ghanaian but even the South regional we can work together to bring the real story to the younger generation that will give them really self-esteem and also confidence in themselves. So the endeavor to identity to historical, UNESCO. So especially the General History of Africa published by UNESCO, specialists from many countries who worked on this work laid a theoretical, methodological foundation. They were concerned with questioning the abusive simplification to which a linear and limiting conception of universal history had given rise and reestablish the truth of the facts whenever necessary and possible. They endeavored to identify historical data which makes it possible to better follow the evolution of the different African people in the socio-cultural specificity. In this immense complex and hard task, we saw the emergence of the African manuscripts, including the Timbuktu manuscript, a collection of previous unpublished manuscripts in Arabic and Ajami, which is an African language written in Arabic characters. In an article they published in 2019 entitled The Philosophy of Andikra, Symbol of Asante Textile, Jewel and Other Art Form, and that's exactly what the organizer, we got connected last night while I was working, and he was connected many days ahead because he already planned in his mind to put exactly. So I don't have to show you the PowerPoint. Here is the PowerPoint on your roof. So the philosophy of Andika symbols, Professor Bakis of Ghana, Professor Peggy Amar Penning, and Professor Eric Apo Asante, respectively from the Department of Industry Arts and the Department of General Arts Study in Kwame Nkrumah University, Science and Technology in Kumasi, Ghana, argue that symbols and signs have been with man since origin. Symbols can be considered as an ideographical representation of man's character and ideas, which makes understanding much easier. Many cultures over the world have different writing systems, whether it's the Chinese, whether it's the Mayan, whether it's the Inca, the Egyptian, the list will go on. A symbol that conveys messages can be identified in the people. Numerals and Chinese characters are all forms of global accepted ideograms. Unfortunately, many of these writing systems are unrecognized because they do not measure up to what some renowned Western linguists refer to as real or true scripts. De Francis defined real, true script as written systems that are based on phonetic systems. Therefore, this suggests that writing systems that are not phonetic are inferior or in a development stage. Arthur opines that pictographic, ideographic, and phonographic systems of writing do not represent inevitable stage in the development of writing, as no direct evolutionary line can be drawn from pictographic to the phonographic system. However, critically analyzing Asante and Adikra, writing system, it can be said that phonetic writing system should be the basis of what is considered as real writing. And that writing system should be defined on how they are used to communicate within their respective culture. Since there is a writing, at least I'm convinced, and I hope I've convinced you too, there is also an undeniable content that could cause the enthusiasm of curiosity of any youth to learn about his past, to be prepared for tomorrow. Here comes the restoration of the culture of reading to the one who were once the people of the streets. And that's the way we call the people of Timbuktu, the people of the street, the people of the book. Professor Thiam from Senegal said, and I'm almost closing, just 2 quotes. The greatness of people, like the vitality of his culture, always depends on their ability to manage their memory. This is based on the will and ability to remember one's potential. Fidelity to the duty of memory worthy of this name. It is the source of unity and solidarity, the pledge of power, the guarantee that openness to others can take place without complex, nor ostentation without absorption. Because we can only truly love what we know very well. The commitment and motivation of peoples or communities in favor of their continent and their conscious solidarity with the other people who compose them undoubtedly depend on the positive perception of what they had of their past, of the value and relevance of their culture, of which history and language constitute the basis and substance. I conclude by quoting the Director General of UNESCO, the former Director General of UNESCO, Federico Mayor, saying that in order for the Africans to occupy the place it claimed in the current millennium, African population and civilization must, without delay, reconstitute their civilization heritage in all its authenticity. And that's the reason I'm here. Revisit it, make it discovered, so that the diaspora, when they come and they feel that they're at home, because this is their culture, this is where the ancestors really used to operate. So they will make it discovered, make it known and loved, because it represents not only their irreplaceable contribution to the heritage of the universal, but also above all, the nourishing sap from which the elites and all social strata must drink if they want to find the best answers to the challenges of the present and those of the future. On one hand, on the other hand, the strength, the vitality, and confidence necessary to participate in the debates of what Professor Sheikh Antajab used to call where the destiny of the world is sealed. Let us reclaim the narrative. I promise I will be short next time.
Your Excellency, Edmond Mukala, welcome to Accra. Welcome to Ghana. Very annotated, very stimulating. I have struck a
in the Laboni Dialogues Literature Symposium. Right now, I feel like a novice, having to say a few words before a group of people whose work requires the use of words all the time. However, I deem it an honor to find myself among highly accomplished scholars, writers, publishers, and other key figures in the world of literature. I am at this point serving notice that I will be requesting some picture sessions to go and intimidate my children with my newfound celebrity status. For me, it is mostly intellectually intimidating when I visit homes or offices and see a display of well-stocked bookshelves Even though I possess a modest collection of books too, the challenge I'm yet to overcome is making the time to immerse myself in them. This challenge to make time for books, I want to believe, is not just mine. The challenge to make time for books, but also one player's nature of some of these sources. Social media is the number one victim. And together we must find interesting ways to create a reading addiction too. As stakeholders with the responsibility of championing the cause of books, we must not just keep producing good books, but also find innovative ways to ignite the passion for reading across all generations again. I want to believe that the need to reignite a passion for reading was a reason for the introduction of the UNESCO World Book Capital in 2001. The World Book Capital initiative is an attempt to systematically bring books, arts, and culture back to the top spot on the leisure list of many people. To achieve this, UNESCO is garnering global support for books, art, and culture by rotating the hosting rights of the title. And on Monday, April 23, 2023, Accra became the 22nd host of the UNESCO World Book Capital. Our city joins the ranks of previous hosts, including notable names like Madrid in Spain, Alexandria in Egypt, New Delhi in India, Port Harcourt in Nigeria, and Montreal in Canada, to mention but some. The city of Accra has designed its hosting rights around 6 thematic areas, namely, to transform minds and promote lifelong learning through books, to provide schools and communities with reading infrastructure, to promote the development of books by promoting the Florence Agreement, to promote creative skills aimed at addressing unemployment, substance abuse, truancy, and teenage pregnancy among the youth, to promote fundamental human rights and access to information and books, and to promote arts and culture by showcasing and preserving Ghanaian arts and culture. With approximately 6 months to complete the hosting year, I would like to conclude by saying we need additional partners to expand the experience of Accra World Book Capital for 2023. We need to promote collaborations to grow the book industry in Ghana. We need to kindle curiosity and interest to make people explore, embrace, and commercialize indigenous books, arts, and culture. Finally, we need to create a Ghana World Book Capital by utilizing the experiences gained from hosting Accra World Book Capital to implement a regional book capital initiative, an initiative that will encourage our 16 regional capitals to compete annually for the hosting rights of regional book capital on a rotational basis. Thank you very much.
Last but not least, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome from Abu Dhabi for the second bite of the sherry, Awam Ankpa, Dean of the Arts and Humanities and Vice Provost of the Arts, NYU, Abu Dhabi. Welcome once again to Accra.
Thank you. I won't read a script. I mean, first of all, let me go to the end to say welcome. Welcome home. Welcome to a crossroad of sorts, a crossroads of histories, civilizations that typifies the city of Accra. It could be from our brutal encounter with the Atlantic modernity through slavery, or with the trans-Saharan slave trade, or our encounters with each other, no matter how brutal, sometimes pleasant, most times unpleasant. This is a crossroad of cultures. And that was why 20 years ago, we had an audacious president at NYU in New York. It was only 2 years after September 11th attacks when we ran into then President John Sexton on the streets of Washington Square Park. And he said something which we never forgot. We really must write Africa in the narrative of NYU. And at that time, three of us, Professor Yao Nyako was an economist, Professor Mancha Diawara, who is a university professor of comparative literature and film, and myself, as Pan-Africanists, thought, how do we do that? And the story is here 20 years later. And one of the attractions then was to emphasize these crossroads as actually the reason why African cultures endure is not because of any form of purity, but it's because of what we become after our encounters with others. The durability, the translational aspects of cultures, the resistance and resilience to be subjects of history and culture, all of the things that really animated one of the reasons we chose Accra to really set up NYU Accra. It's been home for us. I was here only from 20 years ago. We had a check, no bank account. We had no site. We had nothing. They just said, go to Accra. And as a matter of fact, the real estate manager who became our banker lives somewhere next door, I believe. Yeah. And we just innocently deposited this big check and said, we don't know where we're going. We needed a place to stay. And that's how we started from that street corner to this particular place and so on. So, but it's really tribute to one of the reasons we chose Accra was also that it was the home where many African writers crisscrossed, right? So from the F. Sutherlands and others, right, to indeed those who have joined their ancestors, Kofi Awuna, who was also on the faculty here, right, to Amata Aido. All of these people were the reasons we came here, and we set up an African Literature Association conference here. This was the place where a few months before his execution, Ken Saro-Wiwa was honored by the African Literature Association at our grounds in NYU, Accra. So it is really a historical space, and we hope your visit will enhance that history and the historicity of a place really that welcomes everybody to expand the idea of what we become when we encounter each other. And I'm hoping that as writers, you would actually continue to have a lot of influence on literature and reading in Africa. And I'm hoping that your works are translated, they are portable and available for the high school kids, the elementary school kids who read voraciously. So it's one of the few parts of the world where reading books is such an obsession by different generations. So if you're a writer, you should be hopeful that in Africa, people will read your works, if not now, later, right? But we hope that your presence, you'll encounter monuments, institutions that actually reflect the history of the multiple encounters that describe what Accra is and what Ghana is, but more importantly, what Africa is. So welcome to NYU Accra, and welcome home. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof, for that and off-the-cuff presentation, and welcome. We'll have a little break. If you have a copy of the program, there's a little change in our sessions. The second session becomes the first now. So we are doing crime and reputation. So that should be our first session. Crime and reputation. And after which we will welcome which woman? So
So,
One, two, yeah, try two, check 1 2, try 2 1 2, 1 2 1 2.
I am very delighted to be part of this discussion, the first discussion for reclaiming the narrative at NYU Accra. So thank you very much, Frankie, for inviting all of us. We have made history, I believe. Yep. I shall begin. This panel is called Crime and Reputation, and I've got 3 criminals with me. Femi Kayode, author of The Light Seekers. Tendai Huchu. Oh, Tendai, you like Tendai L Huchu now? TL Huchu.
TL Huchu, yeah.
What does the L stand for? Love more?
No, nothing that dramatic, but I messed up my reputation with the other one, so you change your name a little bit.
Aha. Okay. Thank you. It seems that we don't actually have Tendai's book with us, but he's going to read an excerpt anyway from a PDF that he has. And then, of course, Lay Aden Lay of the Amaka series and others. And he's going to be reading from Unfinished Business. So I'm going to start by asking them to read just a short excerpt as a teaser, so that by the time we finish this panel and we're going for lunch, y'all can rush around and buy their books and they can sign for you. Femi, kick it off.
Oh, wow.
Thank you. So I'm going to be reading from the opening of my book called Light Seekers, which is the first in a series that's the protagonist is an investigative psychologist who specializes in finding out the reason why a crime happened. So he's not interested in the who done it, but more of a why. And I've always believed that this is very important to reclaiming the narrative, because when we understand context, then we understand how we got to be where we are today. So this is the opening, and it's called Sauce. The October sun is as hot as the blood of the angry mob. John Paul follows the crowd as they chant and push the three young men. They've been stripped naked, their scrotums shrunken from fear as the beatings result in wounds that will never become scars. Sticks, stones, bricks, iron. Bones break, blood flows. Tearing flesh draws short-lived screams from tired lungs. The men fall but are swiftly pulled up and dragged through the street towards a place no one picked out, but everyone seems to know. It rained the day before, making the red earth muddy in several places. When the young women fall here, they are kicked. The young men fall here. They are kicked further into the ground, their blood mixing with sludge. By the time tires are thrown over their heads like oversized necklaces, and the smell of petrol wafts so strong that some in the crowd cover their noses, madness has staked its claim on what is left of the day. The strike of a match bursts flame as a brick crushes the skull of one of the men, licking brain matter and life, so he doesn't howl and writhe like the other two when fire starts to lick their skin and hair. The phone thrums in John Paul's hand. The battery indicator flashes red. He lowers the smartphone and looks around. He's not the only one bearing digital witness to the execution in progress. He considers using the cell phone he had taken off one of the burning men before the mob pounced, but the irony wouldn't be worth it. It's over anyway. Time to go. As John Paul walks away, I follow him in the shadows, unable to unsee the nightmare he had created behind us. And because he doesn't look back, neither can I.
Thank you very much for that reading. Please don't be fooled by his name. Femi Kayode is one of two writers from Namibia, like in the whole country. Thank you, other writer from Namibia. Chennai, over to you.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here. I just came for the Banku and Tilapia, so this is a bonus. I'm going to be reading a short excerpt from a book called The Mystery at Dunvegan Castle. And the lead character is Ropa Moyo, a young girl of Zimbabwean heritage who is an autodidact. She's uneducated, but she finds herself at this conference of Scottish magicians, and she's at a dinner listening in. I just thought I'd pick the most pretentious passage I could find, seeing as we are here at NYU. So they're having dinner, and she's listening to these conversations about magic until someone ropes her into the thing, whereas she would just prefer to sit there and listen. Then the spotlight shifts. I wish to inquire about Miss Moyo's opinions on the development of Scottish magic. I'm certain our honored guests would find such discourse edifying. Nethia Walsh, the Edinburgh schoolboy, suddenly declares in an RP accent. I nearly choke on my almond sponge. That little twat, I'd been happy enough chewing my grub and listening to the experts talk. What the hell do I know about anything? I don't want to bore anyone. The evolution of magical science is well known to everyone at this table. I deflect, hoping that's the end of it. Your ignorance on these matters reveals itself through your unfortunate phrasing, Miss Moyo. Allow me to correct you if I may. Nethia replies pompously. No serious practitioner uses the term magical science anymore. It suggests a kind of pseudoscience, one associated with magical thinking. The hierarchical ordering, where you place magic before science in your taxonomy, is self-evidently flawed. We are not alchemists. Science does not proceed from magic. Science can't be a product of magic. Rather, I prefer the more accurate term scientific magic, which demonstrates that magic is a result of scientific thought, not superior to it. It is a branch of science, a hard science equal to physics or chemistry or biology. It is founded upon systematic observations, experiments, and uses of mathematical principles, drawing across multiple disciplines. In fact, scholars like Lamont and Watt have suggested that magic is the ultimate practical application of science. And so, in future, I would advise you not to embarrass yourself by employing such dubious terminology. Earth, swallow me whole. Like, who cares? But the cat's got my tongue good and proper, and it's hard to know how to respond since I know the douchebag knows more about things than I do. I probably look like a muppet, wishing I'd not been invited to this bloody dinner now. I'm a right whopper. Young man, you may think you sound original, regurgitating worn cliches, but I assure you that debate was already stale back when I was in school, long before you were born, Mrs. Featherstone says with a laugh, and I give her a grateful look. Montgomery, I'm surprised you still teach this sort of thing at the Edinburgh School. I'll stop there, but I'm sure we'll have a lot of cliches we'll be speaking about today.
Thank you very much, Sendai, for that insight into Western witchcraft. Le, please, can you bring us to Amaka?
Yes. I'll be reading from the third book in the Amaka thriller series. Amaka is a Nigerian lawyer who runs a charity called the Street Samaritans. The charity watches out for sex workers because in Nigeria, sex work is illegal. So the women and the men, the people who are caught up in that industry, are subjected to the worst kinds of sexual crime and everything, violence. So Amaka runs this charity. Officially, that's her job. Unofficially, she keeps a record of men, mostly in Lagos, who use sex workers. And she does this to keep the women safe. And it's the women who give her the details themselves when they've been with a person. And by keeping these records, when a woman is about to be picked up with a client, someone she's never been with, she can send the registration number of the car to Amaka via text. And then Amaka can check on her records for what, if any, information she has on the person. And this way she's able to say, be careful, he's going to try and slip off the condom. You can charge him this much. He likes going with two women, so look for a friend so you're not with a stranger with him. But more importantly, she can say to them, don't go. Because there are people on her records who've picked up women and they've never been seen again. To know the rest of what happens to them, you have to buy the books. So, Unfinished Business is the latest book in the series. Slim sugar, holy honey. Slim sugar, holy honey. Pastor Frank, in a pair of purple socks, white fronts, and a white singlet tight around his belly, held his hands out and made another playful attempt to catch Funke. Funke, slim, tall, in black silk panties, and, at 27 years old, 20 years younger than the pastor, ran behind one of the two sofas in the living area of the Sheraton Hotel's presidential suite, her hands over her breast. Frank laughed. Funke chuckled. The air conditioner had chilled the room to 18 degrees, but beads of sweat lined Frank's forehead beneath his dyed hair. He stood straight to catch his breath. You need your inhaler? Funke asked. Frank shook his head. He arched his back again and held out his hands, fingers spread. Slim sugar. Funke dropped her arms to her sides and jiggled her breast. Holy honey, slim sugar. Burna Boy's Last began to play from Funke's phone on the armrest of the chair where she had laid her clothes. They both looked at the glowing screen before turning to each other. Funke shrugged. Frank pretended to step towards the phone, the ringing phone, and then made for her. She screamed and ran behind the dining table. They laughed. The phone stopped ringing and the doorbell rang. As one day turned to the door, Frank checked his watch. Are you expecting someone? Frank asked. Shh. Funke asked. Are you expecting someone? Funke asked. Shh. Frank put his finger to his lips. A bell rang again, followed by someone knocking on the door, calling his name. It was a woman's voice. "Frank, open the door." His back stiffened and his eyes widened. He began to breathe even faster. Funke did not know who the woman was, but she knew that voice. It was the voice of a woman in distress, the voice of a wife who had just caught her husband cheating. "Go inside," Frank whispered. "Hide. Don't make a sound. Go, go." Funke had already considered potential hiding places in the suite. There was nowhere a raging wife wouldn't check. The banging on the door was getting louder. Frank jolted into action. He gathered Funke's clothes and thrust the bundle at her. He began pulling on his own clothes, missing a leg of his trousers and almost falling over. In the midst of the chaos, Funke stood unmoving. "Go," he mouthed, his face pleading as he grappled with his belt. But Funke was thinking. His wife would ransack the entire room, wardrobes, under the bed, behind the curtains, even drawers. There was no point hiding in there. Her eyes fell on the sofa. "Do you have a knife?" she whispered. "Do you have a knife?" she whispered. He stared at her. Funke moved behind the sofa and began to tip it over. He understood immediately. He ran to her, and together they rolled the sofa over. With its base exposed, Funke felt the fabric. Frank ran to the writing desk set flush against the back of the second sofa and returned with a letter opener, ignoring the pounding on the door. Funke made an incision in the fabric. She tore lengthwise, then downwards, completing an L. She pushed her clothes into the opening and climbed in, causing the fabric to tear even some more as she did so. He pulled the sofa back onto its leg and checked that no one would suspect there was a woman in the little space between the cushion and the ground. Now fully dressed, he dug into his pockets for his handkerchief, mopped the sweat off his face, walked to the door, held the handle, and scanned the room one last time. Thank you.
Africa in fiction is boring, it's heavy. Response?
That is very true. Except for the stuff that the three of us are doing. You know, that's the good stuff. No, you know what? It's even hard to speak in general about something called African literature, right? Because there is a lot of stuff. You kind of have to discard huge chunks to come to that conclusion. There's a lot that's going on at the moment. Right now we're talking crime. There's a whole sci-fi fantasy scene going on. There's your literary fiction. There's romance. So you kind of have to pick what you choose, you know, what you wish to say is boring. But I think there's something for every reader. You know, when I read certain books, certainly, I don't expect to like them. But there's certain authors that I naturally gravitate towards. And if you're bored with it, you're just looking in the wrong place. There's loads of material out there. There's, I think James Murua is here. I was having a conversation with him some time at Ake, and he said, this is a golden age for African literature. In the sense that, you know, years ago, you could almost have the idea that you can keep up with what's happening on the scene in terms of output. But nowadays, there's so much coming out that I don't even bother to try to follow African literature because there's just too many books coming out. It's not possible to consume them all. So that's how it should be. Find what you like and you won't be bored.
With what Tendai has just said, do you think it's possible to be a specialist in African literature?
To be, Jesus. Is it possible to be a specialist in African literature? Before I answer that, I will answer it. However, there's something I just need to get off my chest. Very often when I'm at book events or around writers and they figure out or they learn that I'm a writer, they always refer to my decision to grow my hair the way I do and have my beard, and they say to me, you're trying to look like Wole Soyinka. And the professor being around for this event, for this beautiful festival, I thought I should just, you know, address this once and for all, right? All those people who think I'm trying to look like Wole Soyinka are absolutely right. Just want to sort that one out. Yeah. Is it possible to be a specialist on Africa? can you be a specialist on African literature? I think Femi has a good answer.
That is so not fair. I don't think so. I think it's absolutely impossible. I think you can be an expert in African narrative, you know, the kind of stories that we tell, you know, or something like aspects of, because I don't think so. I think there's a tendency for us to maybe in a pedagogy create some kind of a framework of analyzing literature.
Look at you with the big words.
Well, we have create some kind of a framework for analyzing literature from Africa. For one, I'm personally very embarrassed. I feel like I'm an imposter right now because this is my first literary festival. And when I went into crime writing, I was told, yeah, then you're not writing literature. You're just, you're writing pop culture. And then I was invited to this, and I'm like, yeah, but they're bigger writers. I mean, I don't tell those kind of stories. The reality of the matter is that when we talk about literature, we're talking about many forms of storytelling. And only a narcissist or an arrogant, conceited person would say that I'm an expert in that kind of varied storytelling techniques. And I think academics are a bit, like NYU, are a bit more humble. I don't think they would say they're experts in it.
All right. The two of you, you've got women protagonists in your books. How dare you? Why?
There's absolutely no way I can write about violence against women from a man's perspective. Now, I've been very careful in writing Amaka. You will notice that when I write her, I don't write close second, right? I don't go into her mind as much as I would I write multiple POV, but with Amaka, I'm a bit objective. We see her through her actions and the way people react to her. It's similar to how I will not write a trans character. It's not my story to tell. I will have trans people in my stories. I have people in the LGBTQ community in all of my books intentionally. I have the governor of Lagos who's gay. Yep, in this book, intentionally. It's important that we do these things. I have people with albinism in my books. I have people who are little people. I think we need to use literature to, I hate using the word normalize, but to show people the diversity of who we are. And when we do that, hopefully we'll begin to get away from these constructs that makes us think, these people are not like us, or these people are bad, or these people are not right, or something like that, right? But how dare I write Amaka? I know Amaka well. Amaka is, someone once asked me in a festival, like, who's Amaka based on? And I give my normal spiel, like Amaka is a composite character of all the women I know, women I've loved, women who've not loved me back, women I've worked with, friends, sisters, colleagues, people I admire, And that's the normal thing I say, which is true, because she gets pieces of her life, a backstory, her name from different women. And then after the festival, after I was done, my panel was done, this same woman came up to me outside, looked me square in the face and said, "Where's your mother in the book?" And it was at that instant that it hit me. I based Amaka on her. So I actually know her well. Someone who seems to have committed class suicide, someone who's dedicated her life to looking after other women, to looking after, who's concerned with things that affect young women. I was writing about my mom. I can go on about this, but we've been told we have very little time, so I'm going to stop.
Absolutely, but thank you for introducing us to your mother.
She's an amazing woman.
Tonight.
Yeah, I'll jump off something Leah just said, which is, I know Amaka well, because I felt there you were talking about character, right? I have a slightly different approach in the sense that, for me, the word itself woman in terms of writing a story, just the same as Ben, is completely meaningless. What I'm trying to create is a character. Now, characters, if you consume enough TV shows and stuff like that, you know, the most interesting characters are the ones that are kind of unrealistic, right? You will never have someone like a Tarantino character in real life. Or, you know, they are larger than life.
He's not been to Nigeria.
There you go. But when you do those, then people will say, oh, that's, you know, that's too fictional, it's unrealistic. So you kind of have this balance. It's like, the approach for me is like a map, right? A map is useless if it's like a one-to-one, if it has a one-to-one correlation with the place that you're drawing. It's those distortions, that narrowing down to certain points, those things that you erase and the bits that you choose to keep. So for me, if I just went into it and thought I want to write a woman, I would probably default to my stereotypes about what I think it is to be a woman. And that's completely useless. So my approach is, who is this character, right? Ropa Moyo, for me, she's a strategist. She's really intelligent, she's compassionate, but she's a bit rough because of her life experiences. She has a hard edge to her. And those are the things that inform the sort of like creative decisions I make as I'm writing her. If I was to create a different character and give them the exact same scenario, that other character might react to things differently, which is kind of how we behave as human beings. You know, you might insult Femi and he'll just say, well, you know, that's cool. You might insult Lei and he'll punch you in the face. So people react to things differently. And if you go with the character, I think you won't get it wrong. Readers will forgive some of the flaws that you might have because, again, women are so radically different that the most important thing is, does the character fit into the narrative that you want to tell? At least that's my approach.
All right, thank you. Femi, Philip Taiwo's, in Light Seekers, you used a very real incident that happened to do the story. And then, of course, your upcoming book, Gaslight, when is it coming out?
Next month.
Yeah. Also uses some real incidents that have happened in Nigeria. Is this something that we can expect more from your crime?
Yeah, I think so. I really believe that one of the reasons why because I live in diaspora, I live outside of Nigeria, and many times...
Did you just call Namibia diaspora?
Okay, well, yeah. Sorry. But it does feel like that sometimes. Right, Remy? It does feel like that sometimes. But the reality of the matter is that every time I share something with almost all Nigerians that live in diaspora, we call it a love-hate relationship with Nigeria. You know, we love this country as passionately as we are resentful of it. And you can't, it's in sort of in our DNA. You can't take it from us, you know. We are very proud Nigerians. I'm very proud of the fact that even my kids, you know, they're born in Namibia, and they asked, okay, they can take their passport and then get a Nigerian get another passport, and they're like, no, we're Nigerians, you know. So we're very proud Nigerians. But there's something that happens every time I go home, and I go home a lot, and that is that I have a lot of why. Why is this happening, and who is benefiting from this? This so clearly in a country where we have maybe the largest number of professors, intellectuals, some of the smartest people in the world. How can things be so unexplainable, you know, obviously? And so I created this character called Philip Taiwo, who is an investigative psychologist, and I wanted to use him as my eyes to finding answers. You know, really understanding. And so when this issue of 4 undergraduates in Nigeria were lynched and burnt to death, I just couldn't sleep. All I had was, why? Why? How did this happen? How did we get here? And I think that the more we're able to do that in our narratives, the more it's easy, the easier it becomes for us to be understood, and the concept of otherizing becomes less. So that's might be my mission in life, to actually just help us to understand help the reader to understand Nigeria, Nigerians, beyond the CNN narrative. Yeah.
Well, I sometimes think that Nigeria is very much each and every African country because, I think it was paraphrasing Abu Bakr Adam Ibrahim who said, why is a country of such excellence led by so many mediocre men? And it's usually men. Yeah, but it could be anywhere, really. But I absolutely understand what you're saying. Reclaiming the narrative, what does it mean to you? And to your writing?
Reclaiming the narrative. First thing I think about is the importance of words. Reclaiming, like, we're not claiming it, we're not trying to be part of it, we're reclaiming it. Reclaiming the narrative.
The crime writer is a philosopher.
I was going to say something profoundly intelligent, but now that you said this, it's gone. I think that for far too long, and not just in literature, in all aspects of what it means to be black, African, even the word black, I think we've just accepted, the same way we've accepted the borders drawn across Africa, we've just accepted it. Adichie says she wasn't black until she went to America. I get that. I personally think that, I'm going to say something very controversial. I hope I don't get canceled. Slavers, there's a story about slavers in America, in the South, in the very early days of slavers, that this slaver guy was worried. They thought, there was a time they thought when slaves tried to escape, when enslaved people tried to escape, it was a mental illness. They actually had a name for it. You're trying to escape people who've enslaved you, or you're fighting back against people who've occupied your land, and you're mad for doing that. Anyway, so the story goes, and this is true, according to Google. So this guy was having issues with these people. They just kept trying to escape, and he didn't understand why they tried to escape. So he had heard about this other guy who was like an expert in slaves, in making them not run away. So he came there and he said, do they know where they're from? Do they know the origin? Do they know where we took them from? It's like, yeah, they do. Well, that's your problem. So long as they know they're the people of the Shanghai Empire or whatever, so long as they know the strength, their culture, when they say that you're not cultured, and then they loot your culture and put it in, the Queen is a receiver of stolen goods. Oh, well, the King now, right? The British Museum is full of our culture and the culture of the rest of the world. When they stop you when they tell you don't know how to write or you never wrote, and then for 400 years, they cut off every knowledge, every remembrance of what you were, then at some point you become a foot soldier of what they're doing to you. Not talking to anybody specifically, but then you start giving your children Christian names. You start, I'm not talking to anybody in particular.
So,
I'm just saying,
already.
Right? As an African, you're in Africa, and then, we start giving ourselves these names. A lot of us, we don't have a choice. They were given to us, right? By parents who were brought up when these African countries were still colonial properties. I think reclaiming the narrative is going back to who we really are, being proud about it, not even telling the world. I don't care about the world. Telling ourselves. That's the most important thing first. Let's talk to ourselves. Let's remind ourselves of who we are, who we've always been, historically until now. I think that's what it's about, personally.
Dude, that's deep, eh? Thank you. Tonight, claiming the narrative. What does it mean to you?
No, I think Leah said it all. But my approach to it would just be the fact that there is a narrative in itself is the issue, because to paint a narrative, especially about a place as big and as diverse as Africa, is crazy, right? You can't have that single narrative, but you can only resort to crude stereotypes in order to say this place is that, and we're going back to that heart of darkness bullshit. So by the reclamation, I think, is the act of something that we have here, which is people telling different stories. So we move from a narrative to something a lot more complex.
Femi?
I don't have any narratives to reclaim in my space. I think that reclaiming the narrative for me is about representation. I think it's about actually finally having a black James Bond, finally having a, in my own case, creating a thinking investigator, a smart investigator that puts in the hard work and has a moral backbone and speaks proper English, or speaks proper native language and is quoted properly. I think that's, for me, is reclaiming the narrative, because you are writing the narrative and you are putting it out there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody with a question for my panelists before we close? I'm being told. Yes, at the back, the other writer from Namibia, Remy.
We live in Namibia.
I have a question about crime writing and its popularity on the continent and elsewhere. Why is it only now that we are now starting to enjoy literature or crime writing that focuses on personal crimes, as in one-to-one crime, as opposed to historical crimes, as in nations to nations or one race against another? Purposes of our coverage, if you have a question or comment, just use this microphone in the middle. Thank you. I'll repeat the question. And with regards to crime writing in Africa, why is it only now that we're starting to enjoy stories about crimes that people commit between each other and the way that those reflect society back to us, as opposed in the past when stories were really focusing on generational crimes or continental crimes, and now we seem to be focusing more on the individual and their role in these things in societies?
Can I take this? So, great question, right? If that came up in an exam, I'll probably fail. However, here's the thing. Of the great works of literature that open with a firing squad, right? 1,000 Years of Solitude, Hoye Voges's short story, the one, that brilliant short story he did, where this guy is about to be killed, they shoot, and he experiences an entire lifetime in the space between the bullet, leaving the nozzle of the weapon and hitting him in the head, right? I don't want to spoil it for you. But the best one ever is a book called Atoto Arere, which was written before I was born, which was written when my father was a kid, right? Which is a Nigerian book written in Yoruba, in his own language, and it was about a detective. It was about, no, he has a series. He had a series, no, actually, I lie. It opened on Firing Squad. It was brilliant. It was written in Yoruba. Professor Karim Baba did the translation for academic purposes. It's so beautiful in the English, right? Even though it loses a lot from translating. The Yoruba is just transcendental, if I can use that word for literature, right? And this book was written by somebody who was doing his writing when my father was young. My father is long dead now, but my father was a kid in Nigeria, and he was influenced, he said the reason he wrote it was because of another book written when he was a child, Itan Segilola, the story of Segilola, which was a story, it was serialized in a newspaper. It was written as someone was sending letters. A sex worker was sending letters to this newspaper, and it was being published weekly, right? And it became such, before there was anything like going viral, it was viral. People were queuing up to buy this Yoruba newspaper to read the next installment of this. People started sending money to the newspaper to give to Segilola because, oh my God, these terrible things you're going through in this evil Lagos, right? It was only after the story was, all the letters have been collected and done into a book that people then realized it was the editor of the newspaper that was writing these stories to sell more copies. But my point is, we have been doing this forever. You even find them in the stories of the spider, the tortoise, and everything. You find them in our folk tales, but more importantly, you find them in literature that has not been translated out of the original languages in which they were originally written. So we're not just doing it now, we've always done it. But black is in vogue now, so people are paying attention.
Thank you very much for that, Leia. Do you guys want add anything to that? Oh, okay, fantastic. All right, thank you very much, Leia Denle. Oh, I just had one because we don't have time now.
Sorry, I've been standing for so long.
All right, sorry.
Thank you. Just the title of today, and I remember when the pandemic broke out and we tried to link it to China. Google told us that the Chinese wrote a very strong letter to the media to disassociate the country from the virus, and that was immediately done. Why are we still called black? Can we also write a strong letter? Thank you.
Femi, do you want to answer that?
To write the letter? To be honest, I don't have, I've never thought about it, to be honest. I really haven't. I've never tried to unpack, because it's a social construct. And I've never bought into it. You know, there's only one race, the human race, like Toni Morrison says. So I've never bought into the construct, much like Zukiswa, for instance, refuses to get a visa to go to any African country. It's a personal principle of hers. If she's going to any African country and they ask for a visa, it's like, okay, I'm not coming. Or she will make sure that she gets there and fights for her visa at the airport. So bottom line, I think sometimes for me, it's a personal choice not to look at race as my construct that determines my path and where I'm going to. Like when I wrote my first book, I told myself that I wanted my book next to Stephen King, and I wanted my book next to David Baldacci. I wanted my book next to Jeffrey Archer. And I went after it. You know, I did not tell myself that it's because I'm black or whatever. I told myself that it's because I can do it. You know, and I think that is, for me, more important to pass on to the next generation. You know, don't look at the color, don't look at that. Yes, but we can write that letter and make it a point, but I'm not sure that the world is ready for that yet. Thank you.
And on that note, I am being told our time is up. Tendai Huchu, or TL, Tendai Lavbon Huchu, author of The Library of the Dead, which you can get on Amazon. Leia Denle, author of the Amaka series. You can get some copies over there. And Femi Kayode, author of The Light Seekers, and coming up very soon, Gaslight, which I absolutely enjoyed. So I know you'll all enjoy it too, and thank you, my fantastic panelists.
So if anybody wants a book bought, signed, please see the authors. They'll be on my left, and you'll be helped to see them sign your book or your copy for you. It's a privilege to get your book autographed. I'm going to call up next for the next session Nana Dakwah Sechiama, Suleiman Adonia, Aisha Haruna Atta, Abubakar Adam Ibrahim. They will be discussing depictions of today's African woman. We are welcoming next Nana Dakwah
No, it's Abubakar who's
It's
in charge
Abubakar,
today. When Frankie reached out to me and said, "Oh, I'm going to put you on this panel, which woman?" And I'm like, "Frankie, why?" He's like, "No, don't worry. You don't need to talk about it. You just ask them to talk about it." So you have to. I just feel sorry for Suleiman, who has to do that. But it's a genuine pleasure not to be on the other side, receiving questions about writing women character. The funny thing, though, about this panel is that if you are here on this side, it's because you are guilty of the crime of writing African women in your literature. Not just writing about African women, but writing about African women having fantastic sex, right? And I think that's important, I guess. Because now we're in a space, temporal and spatial as well, where we're having conversations and questions like, what is a woman? Right? Being thrown to intellectuals, to politicians, and to other sorts of people. And somehow they all manage to fumble that question. I don't think that fumbling is going to happen here today. So I'm here with Suleiman Adenia, the author of The Consequences of Love, and his most recent book, Silence is My Mother Tongue, and Nana Dakoa Sekiyama, who is the author of the Sex Life of African Women, right? Brilliant book, you should read it. And someone I haven't met for, this is the first time we're actually meeting, Aisha Atta, who is the author of The 100 Wells of Salaga, and her latest book is Zainab Takes New York. All of them have written about strong African women. So my first question goes out to you. Why is this important that we should have a conversation about the representation of African women in African literature?
I guess I'll start. Good morning. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I think as a reader, which is how I first came to books, I didn't find myself in the stories I read. And I live in the body of an African woman. And I found these stories very interesting, but very lacking. I think the experience of the African woman can be quite unique, very varied, but quite unique. And so for me, also as a writer of historical fiction, I found that women were very absent. There's a famous example I always cite from your side of the world about Nana Asmao, who's this amazing poet and translator and just polyglot. And there's a visitor to the region, and he ends up citing things that her husband is talking about, Mohammed Bello. But then he says nothing about her. All he says is, yeah, women in this region seem to enjoy certain privileges that their counterparts don't. So that spoke loudly. I said, wow, okay, what's going on here? So we've been so absent for so long that I think it's a no-brainer, yeah.
I think for me, I am particularly interested in the stories that we do not often tell about African women. We often haven't told stories about African women that centers us as women who experience bodily pleasure, as women who are trying to find ourselves in many ways, including discovering what our sexualities are, as women who travel, as women who experiment. And you know, for me as well, part of what's interesting about the storytelling as someone who's also an activist is how can the stories we tell, in a sense, encourage us to all contribute to making the world better than it is, right? And I think if you get to know people intimately through the stories they tell, you may understand better the issues they face, you may understand better their identities and how they navigate their identities. You know, part of what for me is really interesting is recognizing that as human beings, we grow, we change. Who we are today doesn't have to be who we are tomorrow. So I'm really interested in that. I'm also really interested in a broad understanding of who an African woman is. I feel like, you know, at some point in time, it seemed like an African woman was a woman who constantly had a burden on her head. She was carrying a pot, she was carrying firewood. That's an African woman, but there are also many types of African women. And I'm interested in the stories of all of those types of African women including African women who may actually no longer live on the continent for a variety of reasons, including slavery, including colonization. So in my book, I tell the stories of women who are Afro-descendants. Because personally, until a few years ago, I had no idea there were Afro-descendants in countries like Costa Rica, you know? And for me, that tells a fascinating story of history and how as Africans, we have always traveled for a variety of reasons.
It's, I think for me, first of all, when I was invited to do this panel, I was like, oh, this is like part of me. But I think it's really important I'm here because I don't just write women. I also write also of people. I also write about buildings, about tables. So the thing about me is that I don't write from the conscious. I write from my subconscious. And that's really an important distinction for artists, especially for writers who aspire to become artists. Because if you write from the conscious, then you're totally aware who your characters are, you know, whether they're going to be women, men, and so on. But when you are subconscious, you completely surrender to your imagination. And what happens in your imagination dictates the characters that you are going to write about. So, so I don't really choose my characters. I think they choose me, that's first of all. Or they, you know, and my job, and as a writer, I think happens before I embark on the journey of writing. And that's what's important to me as a citizen of this world, is that the kind of literature I consume. So I consume a lot of literature by feminist artists like Nana, and painters. You know, it's like how you condition your mind to absorb all the information available to you, so that when you come to write, you are completely surrender yourself to the characters, and then hopefully you will write a woman character or a trans woman character or a white character in the hope that you actually have given your imagination all the tools to birth those characters in the way they want to live.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah.
Can we throw the question back to you? Because you also have written women characters.
I thought like chairing this panel means that I don't get to answer questions. Well, I mean, I think for me, you know, I think it's when I write my stories, I don't specifically think I'm writing strong African women, right? Because I'm writing about the women around me, right? The women that I see, and I don't know why it's such a thing that people say, well, this is novel. I mean, for me, there's nothing novel about it. It's the women that have been in my lives, the women that are around me, the women whose stories I've heard, the women whose lives I've experienced and all that. So it's just me writing the people that I see. And then people say, well, you know, what specific research did you have to do to understand, for example, the sexuality of a 55-year-old woman? I'm like, why are you asking me that, right? Yes, I wrote about a 55-year-old woman having sex when she's not supposed to be having it, but it happens, right? So I don't see why it's such a big deal. I just tap into my experience and that's it. Which brings me back to the question, why is it that every time people write about women and people read and say, well, this is a strong African woman, and she has to be strong because she goes against the grain to have sex with whoever she chooses, or maybe she's forced to marry somebody she doesn't want to and she rejects that. Why is that still considered novel, especially with regards to African literature?
I mean, I don't know why it's considered novel, because I, on one hand, feel a resistance to the term strong African woman. People describe me as a strong African woman. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, I am just me. And at the same time, I also simultaneously see the strength of African women, right? So for me, it's like a really like awkward position to be in. I think if you're somebody who deals with the cards you've dealt and moves on in life and finds ways to survive, people see you as strong, right? But I also feel like, well, what option do you have?
And at the same time, I also want to encourage African women to be weak and vulnerable and not always feel like they have to be strong, because that's a lot of pressure to be strong. I don't want to feel like I have to be the strong African woman, but what I always want to be is me. And just like speaking personally, I think that that's what I strive for. And if that makes me come across as a strong African woman, okay, fair enough, but then don't be surprised if you see my moment of weakness, because that's human, right? And if we're talking about writing, I feel like the more interesting characters, you see all sides of them. You see their vulnerable sides and you see their sides of strength as well. Yeah, I'm curious how you guys approach that.
Yeah, I think, I don't know if it's a human thing or if it's a Western thinking way, just a way of seeing the world and categorizing everything. Everything has to be labeled. So even the African woman has to be given a label. But like Nana said, when I'm writing, I want it to be messy. I want there to be messiness. I want there to be room for mediocrity. Like, I think maybe also growing up here in Ghana, we were raised to be excellent. Like, you're always striving to be excellent. You have to be the first in school. You have to go to university. You have to be X, Y, and Z. But life isn't like that, and life is messy, and I think if there's more room for all the shades to exist, then we're richer for it. But because of how publishing works, because of who controls publishing, I think this narrative is again pushed forward, the strong African woman. And I don't know, I tried to push back against it. Like when I was writing Zainab Takes New York, I just wanted to have fun. I just wanted to write a girl who is, on the brink of her early 20s, and she doesn't know anything about life. She's not going to be strong about anything. She just needs to figure life out. And I think there should be room for all of that. So that's how I look at it.
I think I'm basically drawn to literature that is not polished, because I honestly don't think in our society the perfection doesn't exist. I think as humanity, I think we live day by day going through experiences. At moments we're strong, there are different moments where we feel quite powerless, and that's why I'm against, for example, the editors trying to polish my novels, because I really insist on this idea of vulnerability, of weakness, even of sentences, because the sentences, in a way, convey the sort of characters you're trying to portray in your novels. So, automatically for me, I'm not really into this idea of like, I have to create a character that would make sense. I have no message, and that has been the most difficult part for people in my country to relate to my work, because they will say, okay, you're one of probably the first Eritrean writer translated into so many languages. Why you're not writing about this and that? To do that, it's to go against the ethos of my principle as a writer, which is completely to be, like I said, again, I insist, when I get to my desk, I'm completely naked of ideas, of religion, of whatever, and I hope that I got to a position where I made my imagination a genderless womb, And the whole idea and the whole notion of character built through that imagination, I hope it's not perfect, because I really don't believe in perfection. I'm not perfect by any means.
Yeah, I'm sticking with that, because after you wrote The Consequences of Love, you had pushback about your portrayal of Muslim women, right, who are covetous and desirous of sexual intimacy and all of that. How did you think that affected you in writing your second book, which incidentally starts with a woman being tried for having sex, or allegedly?
I decided to call myself a writer the day I accepted that I would happily live if I lose my family, if I lose my friends, even if I lose myself. I'm really influenced by Lorca, and this whole idea and notion of loss is very important to my work, which is like, you have to lose yourself in order to find new elements within you. So of course there is pushback, but also there's pushback against my male characters. They experiment with their sexuality in the same way that Nana's women characters do, you know. So I have asexual male characters, vulnerable, who, you know, male characters who accept to be dominated by women and so on. And I think that's the reality, and reality where we live. You just have to open yourself to that and accept the fact that a lot of people will not, you know, will not take kindly to that. But as a writer, you have to be an independent country and accept, you know, the way you are. Yeah.
I totally feel that because as a man writing about people, and I say people deliberately because that includes men and women, right? People tend to single out your female characters and say, well, how is it that you as a man were able to write a woman so well? So now I'm going to put this question to the women, right? Have you been complimented on your male characters? Have people asked you, well, how did you get into the psyche of a male character to write him so convincingly? If not, why not?
I think the second book I wrote, Saturday Shadows, has a Kojo is how, I can't remember, this was a while back, but he's a boy in high school who is also figuring out his emotions, and I got some good feedback from that. But I think, like Suleiman was saying, when you're writing, I feel like I'm almost possessed by my characters. They come to you and they embody you, and if you do right by them, that translates. And it translates also when you are forcing the hand also. I do that sometimes when I'm writing. I want the story to go a certain way. I haven't reached your level of, you know, subconscious writing. Sometimes I need to tell this story, so I can tell when I'm trying too hard. But when I let go and let the characters do the walking and the writing themselves, I think then I'm successful. Yeah.
Unlike my two prolific friends, I haven't written many books. I only have this, in terms of this being like traditionally published. And so the question I always get is, will you write the sex lives of African men? And I say no. But actually the book I'm working on now, which is a nonfiction book, because that's what I'm particularly interested in, I find real life, I think, more interesting. And I feel like real life has so many incredible stories that, you know, are almost too good to be true. There was something that you said, gosh, and now it's completely gone out of my head. But then just like the realities of yes, you're talking about like men, for example, who want to be dominated by women, right? There's so many true stories like this. And somehow I think we like to live in a world where we pretend that what we see on the surface is only what exists. So I think I'm interested in sort of excavating and sort of shining a light on those true stories that reflect all the different parts of us, because I kind of want us to accept it as well, and not it to be just this hidden thing, right? Why can't you be a man who wants to be dominated by a woman? You know, like why can't we talk about that openly? Why do we always have to present men as the head of the household or the head of the family? For me, that's very boring, partly because it doesn't reflect reality, and it also, I think, causes a lot of stress for younger people who feel like this is what I have to aspire to, even when that's not who they are.
I think you do. I mean, you have this website which I really used to visit a lot, The Adventure of African Women. And you know, there were in there stories about African women telling about their relationship with men. And I think I learned a lot from those kind of experiences, which are fluid, which are imperfect, which are beautiful, which are this and that. And I think, so there was a kind of indirect platform that you give to people to give, you know, to tell those stories. And I think they are important.
And just one quick thing on that, right? Like when Malika and I did Adventures from the Bedrooms of African Women, we were thinking of women as our audience. And we were so shocked when we found out like 50% of our readers were men. I was like, is there a way I can block men from the internet?
Why would you want to keep men out of the conversation, though?
I mean, it was just I wanted to talk to women. I wanted to talk to my sisters. But obviously it speaks to a need, right? Mm-hmm. And obviously, women have relationships with men. I have relationships with men. Mm-hmm. So women talking about sex also wanted to be in conversation with men. I just did not want to center men. So with Adventures, we got to a point where we were like, we will center women's stories. We will allow stories from men that center women's pleasure. So a man could write about the joys of performing oral sex on a woman,
Yeah.
but I didn't want to like do 10 tips on how to give head. Cosmo does that too well.
Well, as a man, I'm borrowing the voices of all the men here to say that out of protest, we are going to buy all your books. Yeah? Okay, so this question I think is sort of important. You tell me if it is or not. Why do you think that sexual gratification is important in the categorization of a female character as successful or not? Like, if it's a male character, nobody thinks about, oh, you know, he's sexually satisfied or he had great sex or whatever, right? It's fine with the man. But for the woman, that thing has to be there somehow. Why do you think that's important for people?
Okay. I mean, I love that question, and I think it's really important. And for me, that would be important to show as somebody who's an activist writer, right? Like, I think my writing is part of the way I do my activism. We live in a world where we know there are lots of people who study this, that the majority of women actually do not experience orgasm when they have sex, right? And you can say, that's not the most important thing and everything. But for me, I feel like that's also important. And it's politically important for women to achieve pleasure, right? And so being able to show a character who is actually enjoying her body and her partner is paying attention to her body, I hope will inspire people in their real life to do that. One of the things that brings me joy is the feedback I get from this book. I had this man say to me that after he read my book, he asked his wife if she enjoys penetrative sex, and she said no. But she was happy to do it because it brings him pleasure. That's new awareness he has, right? He may not not thought of asking her that question if he hadn't read this book, right? But for me, I hope that changes something in their dynamic and in their relationship. And for me, as somebody who's interested in a better world, you know, like showing that woman, a 55-year-old woman who has a great sex life, a 70-year-old woman who has a great sex life, why do we think it's only young people who should be living their best life? We dessexualize older people. So I'm interested in those kind of things, and I think it's super important to do.
No, I think it's like we've been talking about earlier, just the reality of life is that women have sex also. Women enjoy sex. I mean, I guess women's magazines might have you believe otherwise, but I would hear stories from my aunts about, you know, women in Ghana in the 50s, for instance, who never got married. They did not want to get married, but they had sort of like multiple partners, and then every now and then they'll have a child by this person. So there are lots of women in the 50s who chose to center their pleasure, and maybe it's looked at as revolutionary, but it is also part of our reality now, I think. So again, it seems novel because it's been hidden, but I think the work we do helps shine light on what already exists. Yeah.
That's really interesting because for me, I think all my characters are sort of on a journey, and you know, to discovery, being the sexual pleasure, being the relationship they have with the world, with silence, with languages, with identity, with religion, and so on. I mean, like the character of my fourth book is a 75-year-old man on his way to lose his virginity. So the whole idea of, for me, it was so fascinating because it comes down to this idea of how do we define what sex is? How do we define what pleasure is? What is pleasure to you? I mean, silence is my mother tongue. In a way, it was all about redefining sex, you know? It's kind of moving it or giving it a language. I mean, even silently looking at your lover, for example, or reading poetry to your lover. That's for me, you know, I learned through my characters that this is also a form of sex. And I always say, I don't write my books. I mean, I write my books, but they also rewrite me. I know, and that's the principle, I think, of letting go again, of surrendering, and also being on a discovery journey with your characters. I mean, I learned a lot from my male character, women characters, people who don't identify. And so there's no one thing. It's all about, so many different things that we're trying to kind of, you know, you're trying to listen to, you know.
for you, you kind of, you've talked about this in the past, that writing women is very personal to you. At a point, you actually wanted to abstain from sex because of the dynamics around you, your relationship to your mother and her relationship to sex and all of that. Could you talk to us about how personal this is to you? Could you kind of like...
I was brought up by women. I mean, you know, my mother can't read and write. I just wrote this New York Times essay saying about why my mom, who is supposed to be illiterate, is one of my literary influences. You know, and that was because we lived in different countries. At the time, I lived in Sudan. She lived in Saudi Arabia. And she, you know, because she can't read and write, what women like her usually do is go to a male writer and, you know, ask them to write the letters. But my mom, what she did was record her letters, you know, so she would send those cassette tapes, you know, and to me, and she was incredibly descriptive, and that's me. As a writer, I am descriptive, you know, it's not to anybody. But, so, you know, I learned so much from her. You know, the core of my existence as a writer is to give every sentence a space to breathe on my pages, you know, and that comes from her, you know. So this idea of, you know, and when I was a young boy, I wanted to be like my grandmother, you know, because I wanted to see the world through her strength and vulnerability, tenderness and aggression. You know, there was so much complexity about that relationship that we had. And so that's the kind of spaces that influenced me as a writer. And that's it. Again, it's all about what influence, what shapes my imagination. And these two women really shaped my imagination.
Thank you. Nana, your feminism is really central to the work that you do, right? So could you talk to us about how you think that your feminism and the kind of fiction, the kind of depiction you have of women is a sort of reclamation of the narrative for you?
Oh dear. I mean, without a doubt, okay, maybe not without a doubt, I definitely wouldn't write about sex if I wasn't a feminist. Yeah. I don't even know if I would be a writer if I wasn't a feminist, right? Probably like a lot of writers. Writing is how I think, is how I process, and my thinking is influenced by my politics and my beliefs, specifically as an African feminist. And I think that just influences everything I do, especially as a nonfiction writer. It influences like the breadth of people that I try to incorporate in my work. You know, I was very deliberate in this book, for example, and wanting to interview, you know, women with disabilities about their experiences of sex and dating. I was very deliberate about wanting to include women who are also trans women, you know, women who are in different relationship structures and not just heterosexual women, but queer women. So yes, I think for me, my politics, you know, is part of the reason why I do the kind of writing that I do. I know there are lots of writers who, you know, say proudly that they're not influenced by politics. I think I am one who says proudly that I am influenced by my personal politics. Yeah.
Aisha, you've always wanted to write about strong women. I think the question I want to ask you is, what does it mean for a woman to be strong? And how, since you started with characters like Lizzie Achia, for instance, right? You've consistently produced women who are considered strong in the traditional sense. What does it mean for you personally? And how do you think that is an act of reclamation?
So I grew up in a matriarchy. My grandmother was this indomitable force, both grandmothers. On my paternal side, my grandmother baked bread to send all her children to school. She couldn't read and write either, but she saw that educating her children was what she had to do. On my maternal side, my grandmother started a nursery school, and then she trained different teachers who are in some of the big schools in Ghana today. Tiny Tots, yes. So this is the kind of family I grew up in. On my mother's side, there are 6 siblings, 6 sisters and 1 brother. So you can imagine the kind of household that is. The women were the ones always making the decisions. So I think it is not that I want to write strong women characters. It's just the world that I've grown up in. But now that I'm I guess, more of an adult and I've seen things happen in the family, I see that, yeah, there's this mess that I was talking about earlier. There's this vulnerability. No one is perfect in any of these two families. The power dynamics. They're all the things that make life interesting and frustrating and beautiful. So I think that's what I want to imbue my work with. Less of the, yeah, she has to be a strong woman, but more of the reality and more of the mix of everything that life comes with. Like for you can have one woman going from, you know, studying to be a nurse, this is Lizzie Acha, and then not wanting to speak to her daughter because of something petty, you know? So I think that's what I write. I have twin characters who get separated, and one of them absolutely just needs to break away from their twinship to find her way, and the other one is crying, why would my twin find me? So I think the word for me is, yeah, complex and messy is more interesting to me, because that's what we are. I don't think anyone is strong in particular. Even the strongest people have immense weakness. Yeah.
What sort of pushback have you received for your depictions? Right. What did your mother say, for instance? Yeah. Because I'm asking because, you know, coming from the kind of places that we come from, the cultures that we come from, we've had people who be like, yeah, you're not supposed to write about that. You know, there's like honorable Muslim women, right? They shouldn't be doing things. Why are you writing that? Suleiman hasn't been to Eritrea for a long time. Have you gone back since?
No.
Yeah, so could you all tell us about the kind of pushback you've had for the depiction of women?
I actually don't feel like I've experienced a lot of pushback. When I first started writing about sex and sexuality on the blog, I remember after I had about 3 blog posts up, I showed the blog to my mom, and her initial reaction was, you're going to get arrested, you know? And then I won a prize for best blog, and she and my dad were like, are you going to take us to dinner with this 500 cities you won?
Yeah, I think like Nana, the opposite has happened. So in the 100 Wells of Salaga, I have 2 women, one who's enslaved and the other who is, without giving too much away, a princess. And her sexuality is quite fluid. And I had one person say to me eventually, why didn't you go there? I thought you would go there. So that was the feedback I had. And I think there was a part of fear in me to actually go there, which is why your book is so amazing, Nana. Like everything was under the surface in that book. And I think, so the pushback was more like, yeah, keep stripping off the layers and get to the center of the thing, because I think I let my Ghanaianness get in the way. Yeah.
Well, I had so many letters, you know, of people saying all sort of things, and you know, people, for example, accusing me of being a pervert. But you know, the thing is, for me to be a pervert is one of the acquisitions that you have as you know, when you're told as a writer. You know, a writer can't just be innocent, can't be, you know. I remember one of my greatest philosophers that I really love, George Bataille, said writers are criminal. A lot of writers at the time, they were, you know, outraged because they came to writing in the belief that they have a message to the world, you know, of peace, of that and that. And I think he told them no. You know, not all writers are like that. You know, there exist writers who have, you know, a certain, you know, possibility of actually having, you know, we just heard writers who write about crime just before this panel. And you know, to be able to write that, I think as a writer, you just have to have all those possibilities in your head. And I think you have to accept that you will get pushback. And again, it's just like I said, you know, you have to accept. I mean, you can't threaten a writer with loneliness if you have characters in your head, because you're constantly in negotiation, you're constantly having conversation with your voices. So you constantly, I live through my characters. You know, I can isolate myself for years. It's not a problem. so, you know, again, I think it's one of those tools that we have to kind of maybe encourage aspiring, so-called aspiring writers to kind of have, and that is that to be a recipient of ideas that are not necessarily good.
Okay, so before we open it up to the audience for questions, from Flora Nwapa, Mariam Abba, Ama Etaidu, to this present generation of African writers, how do you think that the depiction of women has changed?
I think we've had pace setters, we've had Amatadu, and we've had Mariam Abba, we've had Bessie Head, and we've had different, like it's diverse. We've had some women who go there with their writing, and I'm thinking of like Mariam Abba, whose everything is sort of woven between the words and sentences. There's a lot of subtext. But I think we've had people who I'm drawing a void here, but actually there's a ancient story that I really like. It's called The Love Songs, and it's set in ancient Egypt, and it's this woman who's yearning for her lover. So this is one that I consider one of my literary ancestors also. And she's talking about, oh, I can't leave my house because I haven't put my makeup on. She's talking about, and it's interesting because it's narrated by a woman and a man, and sometimes the two voices merge and you can't quite tell who is doing the storytelling. But you have this really old story that's talking about love and also doing the subtext thing. So I think it's always been a dance. You have writers who have been explicit. You've had writers who you have to do a little bit of digging to get to what they're trying to say, and I'm excited to see what comes next. Yeah.
I mean, I too am excited to see what comes next, and I think I'm excited by people now also writing more from personal experiences, writing true stories, writing about their lives, because I think that's really powerful. And maybe we see more of that in this era, right? Which also, I think, reflects where we are in the world. I feel like different generations of women also wrote about the issues that were important to them or are important to them. So I think, you know, the fact that now we live in a world where we are more open about sexuality, for instance, is also a reason why writers today would probably address those issues more openly than some of our literary ancestors.
I mean, I have to pay tribute to Nawala Saadawi because, you know, I as a teen, I lived in Jeddah, and so I went through the education system where they tried to make me hate women like her, and I came close. I think and then I found smuggled literature, and then I found her, and her literature, but also the way she lived, through that society. And it was like, fuck you all, I'm gonna live my life. And I think, it's not just the literature, but also the kind of, that kind of belief in that ideology that she had, of way of life. She liberated herself, they imprisoned her, whatever, and so for me, that was really amazing to discover her, even when I was in Jeddah, and discover that world. And that's why we're talking about literature and the importance that literature is really a passport, not just to people who look like you or feel like you. I don't just read African literature, I'm a lover of Russian literature of all over the world. And I found those literature when I was in Saudi Arabia. So this idea that we have to read our own because to give legitimacy to that kind of, I think it's slightly exaggerated, because we do exist. And I don't believe that this is the golden age of African literature. Great African writers existed throughout. It's just that now we have more exposure. Nawala Saadawi, I just want to say I appreciate her so much.
I mean, personally, I just think that the depiction of women in African literature has always been irreverent. And I think this generation of writers have just taken the irreverency to a different direction, but it has always been irreverent, it has always been bold. And it will continue to be for as long as we live and we write. And the generation that will come after us will do worse or better. Thank you. So questions from the audience, if any? Now you need to go to the mic over there.
Hello, good evening or afternoon. Renee Blake from NYU and representing the Center for the Study of Africa and the African Diaspora. So thank you so much for this conversation, really enlightening. I have two things I just want to say. The first one is I want to offer a relanguaging of strength and power, and that weakness can be power, that vulnerability can be power. And so I really want to offer that strength is also allowing yourself all of these other multiple ways of being. That's the first thing. The second thing I wanted to offer and ask really is, so I'm listening to you and I love this idea, Nana, of pleasure and speaking about Black women and their Black bodies and pleasure and the right to pleasure. But it reminds me of being in Venezuela as a Black body with my mother also in a Black body, and the ways that young men desired her body and not mine because of colorism. And so it's grappling with, yes, I deserve pleasure and I have a right to it, but also living in a world where I must also deal with desire, colorism, the imposition of Catholicism, and all of these other things that we are grappling with. So I just wanted to offer and ask, how do you process that as you're also writing? Because I know I can't write from a light-skinned woman, Black woman's body. I can't imagine writing from the perspective of a light-skinned Black woman's body.
No, that's super interesting. And that's actually part of what I'm currently researching, right? I've been interviewing a Black Brazilian woman who has been studying relationships between the relationships that Black women in Brazil experience. And you know, Brazil obviously has a particular racialized history. Brazil is super interesting to me, and I know super interesting to you too, because it's where we have the largest diaspora of Africans, right? It's the one place where actually I've been where I was walking and people were speaking to me in Portuguese, assuming I'm from there, you know? And she was just talking about the dynamics of relationships that Black women have when it comes to their relationships with white men and how they're always perceived, usually perceived as sex workers. You know, women told this particular researcher that I interviewed stories of literally being propositioned even when they were in a bar or a restaurant with like their husband, for instance. And so I think we're talking about, yes, definitely, how women get into relationships, how they navigate their sexuality, how they navigate desire, as well as being objects of desire and also exoticization. That's something to speak about. It's not something I addressed in this book, but it's something I'll be addressing in the next book, 2025.
Yeah, any other question? All right. Yeah.
Thanks so much for all of your wisdoms. And my question is, in reclaiming the narrative with every struggle, respective struggle that we have to face, economic, political, historical, social, everything, where in this hierarchy does the reclaiming of pleasure fall for each of the three of you in your literature?
I don't think. Sorry, can I just? Is that okay? Yeah. Pleasure always existed. I don't think there's nothing to reclaim about. You know, even I was talking. It's all about the language and how you use. I was living in Sudan, for example. My cousin. You know, they tell you like in our culture, for example, homosexuality doesn't exist. I know we will have a panel on that, but but I know. That it does. And so it's again, we could say reclaiming it on what? On the pages of our books, or just saying that it doesn't exist in a society and we're giving it a voice. I don't know. I don't think there's nothing to reclaim. I think it's about we live life, individuals. I know that and that's why I'm interested in intimacy. I've written 3 novels, and all are obsession with intimacy and sexuality. Because, I set the second novel in a refugee camp, and I had so much pushback. Like, how is it possible to write about sex in a camp? People hungry, they haven't got home, they haven't got. But of course, it's like I proved it that it exists. That I am interested in it because I've seen it happen. And so I don't think I reclaimed anyone. Anything. It's just I'm just writing about it. Yeah.
And I think just growing up in a country that's, very, very religious, whether it's Christian or Muslim, I think reclaiming pleasure is revolutionary. I think it's vital. I think we need...
You reclaim it for yourself or
for
for your
everyone,
character?
for everyone. I don't know, I think Ghanaians in particular, correct me if I'm wrong, but on the surface, there's a lot of repression. Desire, a lot of it. That's why Nana's blog, when it came out, was just amazing, because now women had a platform to share their stories, and I think in the back rooms, in the bedrooms, women talk about these things traditionally, but then on the surface, we're very we don't talk about this kind of thing, society. So for me, reclaiming this narrative is being open about talking about these things and making it less of a thing that we whisper to each other when nobody's around. Yeah.
I mean, from my perspective, it's about decentralization of the discourse, right? It's not something that should be exclusive to women because, I mean, like women have sex with women, but most times they have sex with men. Right, and it's important that the two kind of people come into conversations about this and understand that yes, maybe there's a problem here, the way our discourse on sex is going on, and the fact that when I wrote my book, it kind of centralized that conversation, and women actually loved it and came out and said, yeah, this is speaking of our experience, right? And men were like, oh yeah, shit, we didn't think of it from that perspective. And for me, that is the reclamation, the fact that we are centralizing this thing to talk about it. So on that note, I want to thank my wonderful panelists and my wonderful audience. Thank you very much.
And I also like to thank you for moderating it. Forbidden, entertaining, exciting, emotive, engaging. We'll talk about sex. We'll talk about women. We'll talk about men. Talk about pleasure. It has been such a pleasure listening to you digest this. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a break for an hour so you can walk around, make more friends, buy books just to the left, lots of books to buy, get them signed. The authors are here. It's an opportunity. Every time I buy a book and the author is around, I just feel great. Because it will be autographed for you. That's an opportunity you never get in a shop. So please take advantage of it. We'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll be looking at the anthology, short and sweet, the anthology. And we'll be welcoming Remy. We'll be welcoming Dilma. We'll be welcoming Nanekia. So get your loins on for more books. Let me also announce that we are streaming this live on YouTube. We are also putting live updates on Twitter, now X, with pictures, and the hashtag is NYU Accra Lit Simp, Literature Symposium. So NYU Accra Lit Simp. The books are available for less if you bought it here. There are more if you fail to buy it here. So buy a book, read a book, grab a book, love a book. See you again in an hour.
One thing he's forgetting, talk about the books and talk about pleasure.
Thank you very much. We'll see you soon in an hour.